So from the last time, our last discussion, you know, we talked about sound and of course frequency, and then we talked about the properties of sound. Tonight, one area I want to get to, either at the end of tonight's discussion or next time, will be on timing and notes and things like that. But I'm going to take a little distraction tonight because we started with the C major scale, and that is, to me, the heart of everything I've ever learned. And it's always the scale that I come back to. And we've already discussed it before. So I want to talk a little bit more about the C major scale tonight. We labeled the notes of the C major scale 1 through 7. And we even discussed the intervals. There's a lot we can learn from just the C scale. More importantly, it's what I use to transpose to any key, because the intervals that exist in the C major scale map to every other key. So once you learn these, then it's very helpful to just pick it up and take it to another key. Also, there's some really important properties that map to other things as well. All the notes in the C major scale are also the first note of all the chords that you will play in the C major. So with that being said, I want to talk a little bit about keys. It's a spot I find a lot of musicians, including myself, have gotten very confused about how to identify a key. Now, if I were to play a C chord 10 times, and that was my song, I think it'd be pretty safe to say it's probably in the key of C. But what does that mean? It's the color or the tonality of the song. And if somebody plays a C chord and they play another chord but come back to C and are mainly playing C, then we would say, for the most part, the song is in the key of C. I'd take a sip of coffee. Anyway, the C major scale, the first note is C, the second note is D, and so on all the way to the last note, which is a B. And I know, Shane, you've got some music experience, and you probably know that there's 3 major chords in the key of C, and there's 3 minor chords in the key of C. And I have discussed before that a minor chord, before we get into really studying intervals in these chord chords, we should just know that they're kind of darker, sadder kind of chords. And in any key, you're going to have 3 minor chords and 3 major chords, and one other chord called the diminished chord. And that exists in all the major scales and major keys. But there are some things that we can use to identify keys, and mainly it's the chords that are in them. The main chord of any scale is that number 1 note, and that's called your tonic chord. So in the key of C, that's going to be a C chord. In the key of G, that's going to be a G chord. There's not a lot of things that I ask people to memorize. There are a couple things that I think are important to...
Jim,
go ahead.
Again. You say that again about the main note.
I said that the first note in any scale designates the name of the scale, but it also designates the root or tonic chord that's in that scale, in that key. So like in the case of the C scale that I've given you, which goes C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then starting over again at C, it starts on C as number 1, and we labeled the notes last time, D being number 2, E, 3, and so on. Those note numbers, those are notes of the scale, but the number 1 note of any scale is the identifier for the key that scale belongs to. But here's the important part, is that if you were to look at all the letters that are in that scale, they all are the first, are the name of chords that go into the key of C. So, for example, I said that C is the first note in that scale, and so a C major chord works in the key of C, which we would say that kind of makes sense. The next chord, the next note is a D, which is the second note in the scale. It happens to be a minor chord, but it is a D minor chord. And if you went to the third note, which is an E, that is also a minor chord, but it would be an E minor chord, and that belongs to the key of C. And as we go down the line, if we go to F, that's another major chord. So F major is in the key of C. The next letter is G, because remember, I told you that the C major scale, what's nice about it is there's no sharps or flats, or technical term is accidentals, and I think they were accidentally put there. But anyhow, as we go down the line, G major is a chord in C. Then we get to A, which is a minor, the 6th note of the scale. And then finally, B is a diminished chord. And many times people just remember major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. And they memorize that, which I have myself. Because if they know the first note, then they can just say that saying, they can figure out which ones are the minor chords and which ones are the major chords. And now guess what? They know all the chords that they could play in that key that all work. I know that's a mouthful. So let's take a second and think about that. And are we all together so far? Any questions?
I'm good.
So there's something kind of neat about we're still working with this C major scale. So we know we could play a C major chord. And you might say, well, how do I make that chord? Well, you know right off the bat that the C major scale has the notes. And really, how many notes do we normally take to make a chord? It starts with 3. You can have 4-note chords, you can have 5-note chords, but the heart of any chord, that flavor of the chord, is made with 3 notes, called a triad. But if you just look at that scale, it's every other note for the first 3. If you look at C, you go, C is number 1, D, not that note, skip that one, go to E, that's called a third. We got a root, the first note, the third, which is E, the fourth is F. We don't use that, we skip it, and we go to G. So C, E, G makes up a C chord. But let's go one step further. It works for the next chord as well. If we remember that major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished, if we want to make the next chord in here is a D, we went from C to D in the scale, which is a D minor. We got to remember that. But what are the notes of a D minor? Well, D, we skip the E, So it's a D, F. We skip the G, A. D, F, A. We just made the D minor chord. It works that way all the way down the line. So the very, you know, the sixth note is an A. So what do you think we would do there? Take a
What
guess.
do you mean? What do you think we would do there? Do in terms of what?
It's a minor chord. It's an A minor. So we want to make an A minor chord. What would you guess the notes to be? Based on what I just talked about, that you skip every other note to make the triad. And these
So
are
your A minor. You're asking what would make up what would the three notes of the A minor chord be?
yes. Take a guess.
Well, I know what it is, but what might help? Because maybe I might have missed something, but an explanation of what minor versus major means in terms of the interval relationships.
Yes, I plan to get to that, but I was just trying to show a little trick that, uh, you know, before we make triads, before we get into the intervals between the notes, just understanding that if you know the major scale of any key, and you don't want to go through that mental exercise of figuring out your major and minor thirds, if you just skip the notes, every other note will always give you the right triad.
Oh, now I get what you're saying. You're saying major minor chord doesn't make any difference in if you're using that method, because you're just going to skip the note regardless of whether there's a sharp or a flat there.
Exactly, and you know, if I take that to a different, if I take it to a different scale, it still works. You don't have to think, oh, you know, okay, a whole step, a half step, those kind of things, and build your triad. You can actually get to the answer quite quickly by just skipping those notes. And I find myself doing it quite a bit just with guitar, rather than trying to go through a mental exercise and figuring the intervals, which is very important to understand. And I don't want to skip over that. But like I said, it's kind of neat to know some of these little tricks that help you get to answers pretty quickly, especially to kind of play around yourself. Uh, you know, in A minor, we'd start with A. The next note is B, but we skip it. We skip that note, and we have to go back to the start, which is a C, which is actually the one note. We'll take that. We'll skip the D, and we'll go to the E. It still will form the A minor, and it'll go that way all the way down the line. Melody, I didn't put you to sleep, did I?
No, I got it.
You got it?
Yeah, I got it.
So what else can we just learn from this scale without getting into too much detail on any specific? Every major key has a relative minor, and it always lands on the sixth note of the scale. No any other way. That's the way it is. And in this case, for C, the relative minor, which is a minor scale, starts on A. But here's something that I see confuse a lot of people between major and minor scales. Why is it important? It's important for us to understand what a minor scale is and what a major scale is. But in looking at this scale, this C major scale, really the only difference is the note we start on. The notes are still the same. If you look at the relative minor of any major key, it's still the same notes as the major scale. And in the case of the sixth note is the relative minor. Now, if I were going to make a minor key out of any of the other notes, they would be different. So the one that you really have to remember is the relative minor, which is the sixth note. And that can confuse a lot of people. But if you were playing in the key of A minor, then what does that tell me? That tells me that you really are still playing all the same chords in the key of C major, but you're going to tend to play a lot more A minors. And you definitely will know that those kinds of sounds are a little sadder, a little darker. But if I find that you're falling on that minor, A minor, quite a bit, then I would immediately say, okay, the relative major is going to be C major. So if I did want to throw in a major chord, I could throw in one of my major chords of the key, which in this case, we know those are the famous 1-4-5s. In fact, I think it was you, Randy, that asked me about that one day. And that's, you know, if you're playing the 12-bar blues, a lot of people play 1-4-5. Well, it's a very common set of chords because they're the major chords of a major key, but they still work in a minor key. But you got to be careful. If you played them too much, people would start to say, look, you're not playing in the key of A minor, you're playing in the key of C.
Okay, you lost me. You lost me at the 1-4-5.
The one, when I talk about 1-4-5, I'm talking about first.
You're starting with A, right? At the one.
Well, that's where I lost you. When I speak of 1-4-5, I was talking about the C major scale.
Oh, okay. I thought we were studying in A minor. Okay, that's what. Yeah, that's what.
And if you know, so the fourth chord and the fifth chord of that, you know, going down the line. Remember C major, D minor, E minor, F major, and so on, and G major. F major and G major are the fourth and fifth notes of the C major scale. So when people talk about progressions, they mainly talk about relative to the major scale, you know, and although sometimes people will, when they're playing in a minor key, you know, they might call it a sixth chord. Well, that is kind of odd, you know, as far as, you know, well, I guess that's the proper thing to say, not relative to the A minor scale, which would be starting on the note A. And if we called that one, it'd be the one chord of the minor scale. I'd rather refer to it as the sixth. So I hope I didn't confuse you on that. It's the sixth note of the C major scale is an A, and it's a minor chord in the key of C.
So, Jim, just to kind of go back to what you said that every key has a relative minor, and it's the sixth interval or sixth note.
Notes. It's a sixth note.
So, is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct.
Okay.
So let's say that, you know, you wanted to play in the minor key. Well, at the same time you're going to play in the minor key, you have a relative major key. And in this case, in the key of C, it would be C. But if you had another key and you were playing in the sixth note minor key, all those notes would apply to that key the same way they do in the C major key that we're discussing. And that's why I keep coming back to this C, the key of C, because once you learn to deal with the key of C, then you should be able to go to another key. And if you pick out the sixth note, you'll know that's the relative minor, has all the notes of the scale that the major does, and you should be able to construct the minor scale and the major scale. You just use the C major scale as your template, because you don't have to worry about sharps and flats, but you will in other keys. And the reason you will, and this is something that Shane had touched on, is because of the intervals, the distance between notes, right? We just talked about major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. Those are the chords in the key of C. And each of the notes in that scale are the first note of that chord that you're going to play, whether it's major or minor. And I wanted to give that tip just so we can continue to play with this C major scale. And if you want to make some chords against it, you know all the chords that exist in the key of C. But going further, there's also the intervals between each of those notes in that scale. And we know that there's a half step between, tell me what it is, Melody. What two notes, what notes have half steps between them?
Oh, let me see. The C and a D. I'm trying to remember the keyboard. C and a D, D and a E, the G, the F and the G, and I think the G and the A.
Remember a half step.
Oh,
Half steps. You got whole steps, meaning there's a black key in between.
okay. So we got go from the C, and then you just want me to say like
The
C.
ones that there's no black key in between them. What two notes? Well, actually, there's two sets of notes. Between B and C, there is no black key.
The B and the C. I think it's the
E and F.
Yeah, and E and F.
E and F, yeah.
B and C and E and F. And you want to commit those to memory. And the more the more you play with them, you'll realize that there's a half step between B and C and E and F. But between C and D, there's a whole step. There's a black.
Oh, okay, I got you. That's what it is. Okay.
Wait. Just to clarify that for a minute. So even though C and D are both white keys, it's considered a half step between the two because there's no semitone in between?
No, it's considered a whole step because
okay, that's what I thought. That's what I thought. I heard that wrong. Sorry. Yeah, I would say okay. Got it.
So here's the thing. We know that between C and D is a whole step, and between D and E is a whole step. Between E and F is a half step. Between F and G is a whole step. And between G and A is a whole step. And between A and B is a whole step. And between B and C, back to C again, is a half step. And you kind of get used to that kind of rhythm, that whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, half. Okay? If you wanted to figure out what the steps were for the minor scale, we know the sixth note is our relative minor, and you could just continue around the loop and count them. A to B is a whole step, B to C is a half step, C to D is a whole step, D to E is a whole step, E to F is a half step, F to G is a whole step, G to A is a whole step. That has its own, whole step, half step, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step. And that's what a lot of people will memorize for the two different scales. And I do advise committing them to memory, but it's more, the more you do it and the more you get used to it, you don't even think about it. Your hands do what they're supposed to do in making those jumps on a keyboard or guitar or whatever. But what's important to know is that once you learn where they are, then let's take the key of G, okay? Well, the same applies to the key of G. The first is going to be a whole step, So we're going to make the G major scale right now. First is going to be a whole step, G to A. The next is going to be a whole step, A to B. Then the next is going to be a half step. Remember, whole step, half step. So that's B to C. Then we're going to go C to D, which is a whole step. D to E, which is a whole step. E to F is a half step. But remember, I said whole step, half. In the way those intervals are, we talked about them in the C major scale. So in that case, we got to go E to F sharp. Well, guess what? That's our first sharp that we've talked about. We got to keep that same interval for every major scale. So in the key of G, you've got one sharp. It's F sharp. Then from F sharp to G is a half step, which it all fits. Whole step, half step, whole step, half. What do you think about that, Randy?
I'm gonna listen to this again.
And
I don't want to ask too many questions because last time I did that and I listened back to it, I just got confused. So
No,
I'm just listening.
they're always good. So really what I'm telling you here is that the first thing I want everybody to do is make sure they know the intervals of the C major scale, and then kind of get used to those intervals, because if you apply those intervals to any other key, you will be able to determine all the notes of that key. And to go one step further, if you're able to determine all the notes of that key with what we learned about the C major scale and the major and minor chords, those will apply the same identical way to the chords of the G key, the key of G, or whatever key you want to choose. You will be able to get to all the notes and all the chords, which is a lot. It's a lot to digest. But once you start to really apply this C major scale and really kind of study it a little bit, we know we've got 7 notes: C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then the 8th note is C. But we just do the wraparound. So you know the notes, you know, just reiterating what we talked about, that the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord, which are the 1st note, the 4th note, and the 5th note, are major chords in that key. We know the 2, the 2nd chord is a minor, the 3rd chord is a minor, the 6th chord is a minor, and then of course the 7th in all the keys is a diminished chord, which we will discuss more. But if you wanted to know how to make a B diminished chord, then just take my little method. You'd have a B, and it goes back to C. You got to skip C. Then you have a D. So you take the B, the D, and then you skip the E and F. And now you have a B diminished chord. Who's with me?
I think once I just get it all straight in my head, where the half steps and the whole steps are, just remember it. That's all I do. Got to get it kind of straightened out to remember where the half steps and the whole steps and the majors and the minors.
And that's the best thing you can do for you. And same with you, Randy. Where I talked about those half steps and whole steps, they are important. And if you're starting on C, figure out where they are. Then start on A, which is the 6th note, the relative minor, and figure out where the half steps and whole steps are for those. And now you've just giving yourself a lot of power as far as understanding the, what chords and what scales, what notes are in your scale. And you'll notice, like I said, there's some things that are pretty cool about the key of C, because you know that if you hit a black key, if you're playing in the relative minor or in the major, you're hitting a wrong note, because we know there's no sharps or flats. But that doesn't become as easy when you start to move to other keys. You really want to know if that note belongs, but you have a way to figure out if it does, if you can't hear it. And these intervals that are set like this, it's not by coincidence. We talked about semitones, and we talked about that, a tone and the harmonics that go along with it. Well, it's not a coincidence that C and E and G, those three notes, make up a C chord. If you were to really look at the harmonics of all those notes, you'd realize that there's a lot of overlap. That's those little extra components that come along with that base fundamental frequency of any note. It's not a pure 440 hertz for an A note. It's A plus some extra. But if that extra is shared between that extra for an E note and that extra for a G note, then it makes sense why it kind of sounds good together. There's a lot tonight to mull over. I understand, and we'll talk about it more. The heart of it is let's really pound home that C major scale and its relative minor. And to go over once again, the relative minor has all notes that you've learned for the C major scale. They're all the same notes. It's really what note you start on. So would it be fair to say that the relative minor is the same thing as the major scale? It is. It's just that instead of starting on C, we start on A, and we loop back around and come to A, but we played all the same notes that are in both scales. It's those kind of similarities that I think that as we identify them, this stuff will fit together better. You want to try one melody? Tell me what the notes are. Tell me what the notes are.
I can try it. I want
you to try this, okay? So tell me what the notes are in an F chord.
Okay.
You know that F is one of the notes in our scale.
Okay, so it would be the F, the A, and the C.
That's it. You got it. You just made an F chord. You want to try one, Randy?
Yeah, I can try.
All right. Why don't you give me the notes in the E minor chord?
E minor. E, G, B.
You got it. It's that easy. You just skip the note. Now you can make
So
it.
I keep thinking, if I'm wrong, stop me, but I keep just thinking 1, 3, 5.
You are correct.
Is that even relevant though?
It is.
Should I?
It's very relevant. Whenever we're making a chord, we talk about the first note, the third note, and the fifth note, the 1, 3, 5. That makes up a chord, right? But, you know, I'm trying to be very consistent here, because if you start on E, you're not really starting on the 1, are you? You're starting on a 3 as far as our labeling, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of this C major scale.
Okay, yeah, but when I say 1, 3, 5, I'm talking about intervals, the distance between the notes. Am I using that in the correct way?
Yes, when we're talking about these intervals, yes. And, you know, and
James.
for this, go ahead, Shane.
I didn't say anything.
Oh, okay. And for this example, you know, when you are correct in saying, and it works out perfectly for a C chord, a 1, 3, 5 of the C major scale is C, E, G. And if you were to look at the 1, 3, 5 of an A major chord, it would be D, C sharp, and E, but that C sharp isn't in this scale, this C major scale. So that's why, you know, there's two little numbering systems going on there, and I want to discuss that.
Hey, James.
Go ahead.
Don't forget that also chords can be inverted. Chords can be inverted, so even though it's a C chord can be C, E, G, you can invert it E, G, C, or G, C, E, because it depends, like if you're playing the piano, you know, where you're going to play it. It's kind of like commuting, like you're still going to, you go one way or you go the other way, but you still get the same thing.
But in our discussion here, Juan, we're talking about the notes that are in the chord. How you arrange those notes.
Right. But I'm saying like the order played, you can change the order of the notes played to play it.
But it's still a C chord. If you play C, E, G, no matter how you play it on your piano, it's still a C chord. It's just there's inversions. And that's
exactly.
And they only talk about an inversion if it's not C, E, G for a C chord. And on guitar, we call it different voicings, because, you know, and I'm sure they do on piano too. Those two terms get mixed, whether it's an inversion or a different voicing. And what I think is so great about this C major scale is, like you said, Melody, identifying where those half steps are, and to go even further, all the major scales have 2 half steps, and they're always in the same place. They don't move. Now, of course, there's 2 half steps in the minor scale, and they're in a little different spot than they are in the major. But once you identify and use this C major scale to try to learn it, because you know that you're not going to get confused with any black keys. So it's a great place to call home base. And then you can take it and you can move it to other keys. And you can also, from that, you can figure out with that little trick that I showed of skipping other notes, you can figure out the notes that are in your triad for a chord. And then, of course, you got to figure out, is it major or is it minor? Or, of course, the last one is diminished. But this was our first crack at trying to start with the C major scale, identifying what is its relative minor. And we even talked about going through the G major scale, and we realized that it's only got 1 sharp. It's F sharp. But we found that scale by doing exactly the same intervals in the C major scale and applied it to the G major scale. And we found that the last note, the 6th or the 7th note, is sharp. But as you work that same method through different keys, you're gonna end up with more and more sharps or flats, depending on which way you want to look at it. And I use this method for, you know, a lot of people talk about the circle of fifths. I'm not going to introduce that tonight. All I'm going to say is I had a vocal instructor had the thing on the wall, and she quizzed me one day, and I gave her all the answers, and she said, "Good God, how'd you memorize?" I said, "I never memorized it. There's patterns in all of these that you don't need to be looking at the image to know it. You just have to understand that C major scale and what a fifth is, and now you can determine everything you need to know about the circle of fifths from having that knowledge." What is a fifth? It's a fifth note in our major scale. It's a G, right? That's where the whole circle of fifths came from. Pythagoras, the philosopher, is, and you people might remember that he also came up with the Pythagorean theorem. That's a different class. But in any case, there are things that you can get at just by knowing this, you know, properties of the C major scale, and you should be able to determine all those pieces, where it's not as easy for us when we can't see just to look at an image like that and be able to pull it off so we can use it. But we can still get to that information just as easily just by understanding this major and minor scale, C major, A minor, the relative minor. So that was a pretty big mouthful for tonight. Melody, did I put you to sleep?
I'm still here. I just put it on mute. Just letting it all soak in.
Randy, where are we at?
I'm just trying to absorb my notes. And I'm going to go back and listen to this again.
Okay, so Randy, I'm going to ask you a question, and it's not to be on the spot. What are the 1, 4, 5 chords of the key of C?
1, 4, 5 of 1, 4, 5.
1, 4, 5 chords.
So C, F, G.
You got it. So if you were to play a song and you were to play C, F, and G, which would be a cheerier sound, all major chords, you got all the major chords in the key of C.
Okay.
And what I encourage is don't make it more difficult than it is. It is that simple.
Okay.
If we did the same for the key of G, it would be G, C, and D. Those are the first note, the fourth note, and the fifth note of the key of G. So, and that's all the major chords in the key of G. So if you know, it really, you know, which brings up something interesting is that if somebody's playing chords and you're like, gosh, I'd really like to know what key they're in. If you find two chords that are next to each other, like C and D, then you're pretty sure they're in the key of G. And same with the key of C. If you see them playing F and G, you know those are the 4 and the 5. So you know that because they're next to each other, chances are
A.
C.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, and that will come with the more you kind of practice that, you know, this stuff. But that's great ways to identify. One way that I identify keys is I'll listen and then I'll try to hum the overwhelming sound. Somebody's playing a bunch of chords in it, but every song has a kind of a tone to it, a tonality to it, and you can kind of tell where the focus is. So I'll hum it. I'll go find that note on my guitar, and I know that whatever note it is, doesn't matter, I'll find it, and then I'll play a major scale right there. If that fits, then I found it. I found the key. It's that note. If it doesn't fit, then I'll take that same note and start it there, and I'll play the minor scale. And if it's minor, then that could mean, okay, the key that's a relative minor, so I got to figure out what the major, and if I'm on minor, then I know a whole step and a half up is going to give me the major. And that's because of how far it is from A to C. A to B is a whole step, B to C is a half step. So if I go up that distance and then I play the major scale there and it works, then I nailed it.
Jim?
Having this knowledge is helping you find a key if somebody else is playing it. And of course, there's rules and there's different things, extensions, and all kinds of things that you can do to spruce up our music. But these basic bones exist in every song. How are we doing on time, Randy?
We are at 7:04.
Well, Shane,
Yes, sir.
how am I doing? You got some questions?
Well, I mean, yes. What part of it is I find myself having a lot of questions as we go along, but I'm not wanting to. I've kind of been sitting back and waiting because I know that you've got a plan, and I don't want to. I guess what I'm doing is I'm kind of waiting to see if the question's answered later when we get to that point, because yes, I've got some music background, so a lot of this stuff is familiar, but some of it is not. Some of the relationships between the different concepts are not things that I personally know about. So yeah, I'm just kind of taking it in, and maybe we'll have more questions later.
And I would be happy to answer any questions any of you guys have via email, which I probably, because I don't have a society email, so, but I don't have a problem giving out my personal email. This is, and it helps me too, remember, because then I can see if people are getting stuck in a certain spot too. So any feedback, trust me, is very helpful. And I know you have quite a bit of experience, Shane, and there are parts, especially triads, that I do want to talk a lot about. And part of when I plan this out, tonight I really wanted to do a little more work on this, these keys and this major scale, because I'm going to get into timing and things like that, and I really wanted everybody to kind of have a grasp of some of these scales before I get to all that. So with that, like I said, feel free to email me, and I'll give my email to Randy so he can pass it around, and that way we can move on to next week, in a couple weeks, and I'll review the questions, and I'll try to answer questions as best I can. And if it's something that I think is really great to the whole group, then I'll bring them up in the group. Otherwise, I'll just send you a personal message. See if I can answer that question before we move to the next section. Fair enough?
Sounds good.
Good to me.
Sounds like a plan.
Well, I think, Juan, are you still with us? Did he drop out?
Yeah.
Yeah, he exited.
Okay. Well, I hope I didn't put too much out there tonight for you guys, but I think, you know, I'm trying to step it up a little bit more of some of the content. And, you know, I don't want to go too fast. So think about it for the next time we meet. And I'll do a little recap next time. And I want to make sure, you know, Melody and Randy, that you got that concept before we move to the next section. If we have to spend a little bit more time, that's fine. And other than that, you know, thank you guys. Thanks a bunch for participating, and it's always a pleasure.
Well, thank you, Jim.
Mm-hmm.
Thank.
Got it. I just have to listen to it a couple times because this is a new way of me thinking about studying without actually looking and seeing things. So
Well,
I have to go over it a few times.
So, folks, do you guys want to meet on September 1st at 6 o'clock?
Works for me.
Okay.
Okay, that's what we'll set up.
Okay.
All right, guys. Well, until next time, thanks again. And like I said, I'll get an email where people can send me emails so we can just kind of go over, so I can go over some of the questions. And like I said, I will address them.
Jim?
Yeah.
Listen to that tape because I know those things have more chords on it. It's been driving me crazy.
I will do that. I will definitely let you know for sure.
Because I'm going crazy trying to figure out what I'm going wrong.
I don't want you to pull your hair out. Let me. I will. I'll probably look at it tonight. I'll let you know right away.
Okay. That'll work then.
Okay, guys. Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
night, everyone.
Night.
Have a great evening, folks. Thanks for coming.
Bye-bye.
See-
Thank